how did you end up going with this birth center? Why did you go down the natural birth route with midwives and doulas and all that? Like, what led you in that direction?
So I've always kind of been interested in natural birth, even like when I was a kid. The I don't know, it's so like weird to think about it now, like growing up in the 90s, there's so many movies where people are like giving birth. Like Look Who's Talking, 9 Months with Hugh Grant. Like there's so many movies that were on TV in the 90s where like people were like, "No, I don't want the drugs." So like I grew up being like, you know what? Women have been having babies for forever. Like someday when I have kids, I'm excited to have kids. I want to have kids. I knew I was going to enjoy pregnancy and I really enjoyed my first pregnancy. Um, I didn't have complications in my first pregnancy. I had no specific like medical reason to believe that I would have a hard time delivering babies, but I do have a family history with that. So I was even like honest with my doctor about that kind of stuff. And I just kind of went through my first pregnancy with rose-colored glasses on, thinking that it was going to be like, I know I'm strong. I know I have a high pain tolerance. I know that I'm determined for things when I want to be. So I really thought that like I had it in me. And I had thought about doing a birth center in my first pregnancy. I had considered a home birth in my first pregnancy. And everybody around me was kind of like, that's not a good idea. So I decided against it for my first. And I'm hindsight is 2020, like so beyond grateful now that my first was born in a hospital. But at the time, I had read the like Ina May Gaskin book and like Childbirth Without Fear and all of those things. And I'd done a hypnobirthing class. And I really did believe that when my extremely complicated and long labor with my first, which was complicated before I even got to the hospital, I believed that it resulted in what it resulted in because of like the cascade of interventions and stuff like that. And I had kind of at the time believed like 50-50. Maybe it was the cascade of interventions, but maybe it was my body. And I kind of did like I was like, I have a family history of this. So I like back even when they were still having most women deliver vaginally, even when it wasn't like the safest thing for the baby, I still had family members having C-sections. Um, so I had gone into my labor with my first knowing that there was a good chance that there could be a C-section, but like personally thinking I could get over all of that because I read all those books that said I could. And when I was in labor, I would say the big thing, if it's the one regret that I have of my labor with my first, I and I can't even say it's a regret because again, hindsight is 20. Now I have a better understanding of why my medical recommendations were what they were. But I remember being pregnant with my second, the thing that I couldn't get over was that with my first, I went back for a C-section without any pushing effort. I had gotten to 10 centimeters. I was fully effaced. It was a fight to get me there. Like it took hours and Pitocin and flipping in the bed and an epidural. And it was just like everything I didn't want. And they didn't recommend me pushing and I didn't fight it. So then, pregnant with my second, I was like, that's the one thing. And I know if they had just let me push, I would have either, and it was like, I would have either gotten her out or at least I wouldn't have that question in my head of, could I have gotten her out? A year and a half after my daughter's birth, and I definitely had some like emotional stuff to get through after she was born. The C-section was extremely difficult. I after the fact they told me they had like kept me in the OR for a few minutes extra just to watch to see if I bled anymore because they were like, any more blood, we were going to give you a transfusion. So it was not easy. I remember I was getting sick all over myself. It was really, really bad. Again, hindsight's 2020. I know now that like the fighting to have the vaginal birth and like going through all those steps of labor when my body was fighting against it because I'm just not supposed to vaginally deliver babies. Um, I now know that like all of that can how I was feeling on the operating table. Um, so moving forward, I wind up getting pregnant when my daughter is almost 2 years old. And I had been very, very, very driven in that time period between her birth and finding out I was pregnant to find other options, other things that I could do. Even then, I hadn't been 100% set on delivering outside of the hospital. Fika had opened as just like a midwifery company in 2017 sometime, so around the time my first child was born. And then somewhere between her birth and getting pregnant, they purchased the Coit house and started turning it into a birth center. And the owner's very, very, very social media savvy. And so she was able to get it where it's like, you kind of didn't go anywhere.
How seriously did you talk to an OB about a VBAC?
Like, not at all.
You didn't really even go there.
I had the only time that I had spoken with an OB was when I went to my postpartum appointment after my daughter was born. So it was like September of 2027 or 2017. And um, I had said to the OB then that I wanted to try for a VBAC in the future. And she did respond with something that was just basically medical opinion of an unfavorable pelvis. But I was so upset at that time because I had gone through my whole pregnancy with her and she never once said to me anything about having an unfavorable pelvis. And I felt kind of like upset that she hadn't, like, she knew how important vaginal birth was to me. And at no point did she say, it's like my medical opinion that, like, just prepare yourself because I just want you to know. Um, so I felt a little like betrayed by that. I felt like it was a cop out. And I was very open to finding other OBGYNs and stuff like that. But I just got pregnant so quickly. I found Fika, I found Coit House. And when I found I was pregnant, I like brought it up to my fiance, like, are you open to the idea of a birth outside of the hospital? And he basically was like, you're the mom. You do the job. You get to choose. And I'm not supposed to make you do something with your body. You're supposed to feel ownership over that. So it was never, everything just like kind of happened so rapidly that I never even like went to go make an appointment with an OBGYN. But they knew that, like, I told her there's nothing about me that like Mora didn't know when I became her patient. So she had like she had no concern that I hadn't seen an OB who said a VBAC was a good option. So I didn't think, I thought like I live in New York. She's a CNM. She's highly licensed. She had to go, like, she's a nurse practitioner. She went on, she's got her stuff together. She's legit. She's not a high school dropout with a GED who caught 10 babies under their grandma who's preparing to retire. Like, that's not how she got here. I'll be good. She'll ask the right questions. And that's not how it went.
When you picked them, did you interview any of the midwives or any of them like at the time? Did you go like check them out and see what they were doing, what their plans are, and how they operate?
There weren't, like, locally, there weren't many other options. And there were only like two other options in my area. And it would be either, and actually, I think she had retired. So there was Eileen, who we know has lost babies. And by the time I was pregnant with my son, the story of Kai was all over the place. If you started looking up the Buffalo Birth Center and Eileen Stewart, you found Kai's story. So I was like, absolutely not. I'm not going to work with them. Like, Kai's story impacted me. And I would compare Mora to the snake in the Jungle Book, where just like make eye contact with me and like I can tell you anything you want to hear and I can make everything feel safe. So I only met with them, but she just presented herself as somebody who took the safety of it all so seriously. Like, I'm not like other midwives. I'm not like other midwives. I'm medical. And like I give you total freedom, but like I had to do the GBS testing while I was there, and that wasn't an option. And like I had to do the glucose testing when I was there. They gave me the option of the finger prick or the blood test, and I hate giving blood, so I wound up going with the finger prick thing. But like there was a lot of stuff that they were like, no, you've gotta, like, safety is a concern. So I really didn't feel the need, and they were 4 minutes from the hospital. Um, Everything, like, there was not a question that you could ask that they didn't have a good answer to. There was not a concern that you could have that they didn't have options for. I don't know. And it's like everybody in the community too was just like, no, they're great. Like, you don't even have to worry about it. They're great. They're so awesome. But not so much.
You want to go over what appointments look like that led up to the end of when you went into labor?
My appointments were shockingly exactly the same type of experience that I had at my OBGYN's office with my first. And I was a little disenchanted by that. I had been doing my appointments. The owner was going to be on maternity leave when I was due. So I had had all my prenatal appointments with the two midwives who might have been with me while I was in labor. It was a lot of time sitting in the waiting room. It was appointments feeling a little bit rushed because there was always somebody waiting to come in after me. I felt like I got really decent medical care and very medical care. They cared about the same things that I did. They had the same values that I did when we were like talking about plans for vaccines and plans for everything. Like, I'm pro vaccine. So I was like, one of my things was, if you can't give my baby the vitamin K shot at birth, I'm not delivering here. And they were like, we're nurses. So like we support people who choose not to do this, but like we're all vaccinated. We all like, so it was very in line with everything that I really thought that I wanted in that sense. I felt safe, I felt cared for, but it did feel still doctor's officey in every way but the aesthetics. Like it had a creaky old wooden floor and gorgeous banisters and stuff, but it was still a doctor's office.
Do you have a transfer plan with them, or did they ever talk about transfers with you at all?
I tried talking about transfer plans the entire time I was pregnant. It got to a point where I started feeling like I was being like annoying and naggy because I'd be like, so, okay, we're 4 minutes from the hospital. What is the transfer plan? We are so cautious with things that you needing to get to the hospital will not become an emergency. We will transfer you before an emergency arises. We watch everything so closely. We are 4 minutes from the hospital. And like, I had already had a C-section. So I knew that even when my doctor was like, no, I don't want you pushing, I know that it still took like 15, 20 minutes to get me into the operating room. And I'm like, so, and they were trying to make me feel like it was not an emergency, make me feel like this was an urgent C-section situation. And it still took like 20 minutes later. I wasn't cut open for another like 30 minutes. So they very much would play into that and be like, there's really nothing that can happen that you're closer to being in the OR coming from here than you would be in the hospital.
The one thing I will tell everyone to do, as part of the transfer plan is you should be pre-registered at the hospital you will need to go to. Did they do that for you?
They didn't, but I was transferring to the same hospital group that I had had my daughter with. So they had already had all of my information, including blood type, on file and my insurance company and stuff like that. So it was all there. And like we at one point, at one of my appointments, like halfway through my pregnancy, it was brought up like, oh, we don't have your medical records from when you delivered your daughter at the hospital. So I just had to, like, she handed me an iPad and I just like checked off a box on the form and signed it. And she emailed it over to the hospital. And within 3 minutes, the midwife was sitting there looking at my medical records from the hospital. So I was like, the transfer of information is very, very rapid. So even that made me be like, okay, like we are cooking, we're flowing with it. It's good to go. I will say, not for the reasons that they said should give me comfort, but for reasons of how appalling their care is. That was the one truthful thing that I did get out of them in my prenatal care is that if we call the hospital and we say we're coming in with an emergency, you're going to be right into the OR. And that is what happened with me, but it's not because that's just how the hospital handles things. It's because the hospital was so used to this birth center sending in catastrophic situations. So I did, like, when I heard the like timestamp from the, it's all marked in my son's autopsy, like what time the phone call was made for ambulance, when the ambulance arrived, because there's a discrepancy between the ambulance records and the midwife's records about the time between when the ambulance was called and when they arrived, or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was, but there was a discrepancy. I have it all. It's all time stamped in his autopsy. And I think it was under 30 minutes from when the phone call was made and I was in the OR. And I think it was like 38 minutes to first cut from when the phone call was made. That's pretty freaking quick.
It is very fast. I mean, for that situation, but it was because of their reputation, not necessarily
Oh,
because
yeah.
of.
Oh, yeah. One of the doctors who was there that night who wound up doing like my postpartum appointment, um, he wasn't on the like emergency response team who took care of me that they assembled. Like the phone call hit we have a transfer from Coit House. And they like immediately assembled like a snap team of the best of the best of the best of the best. And they all ran downstairs to meet my ambulance. They got me up to the OR. They got me in. They got me going. And according to the doctor who was working on labor and delivery that night, he was like, from the moment the phone call came until we heard the news of what happened, like the end result, it's like not one mother buzzed us for a boost of her epidural. Nobody buzzed us for ice chips. No babies were born. It's like the whole hospital stood still while we waited. And it like everybody was on edge. It wasn't good.